So let's get started on some of these topics here that I wanted to talk about. And for me, I wanted to first get into what is kind of turned into a bit of a hot topic in the NFL. And I'm going to share the screen here just to kind of give people a little context so they can see what we're talking about here. The Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule in the NFL, for those of you who don't know, the Rooney Rule is a rule that was put in place in 2003 that says that you cannot hire a new head coach. You can't hire or you can't make a hire for a head coach vacancy without having, interviewed a minority coach before finalizing that hiring process. And let's take a look here at this Newsweek article. And I'm just going to go through it very briefly with you guys so we can kind of give a little bit more context to this issue. It says a familiar issue reared its head during the annual coaching carousel that has taken center stage in the NFL over the last few weeks. The so-called Rooney Rule has again been thrust into the spotlight due to the lack of minority candidates interviewed for the head coach role by teams needing to fill vacancies. Established in 2003, the rule mandates franchises must interview at least one minority candidate for their head coach vacancy. It did not take long for the Rooney Rule to make its impact felt. Following the implementation, the percentage of head coaches from a minority background rose as high as 22% compared to 6% before the rule was introduced. The effect, however, has vanished almost as swiftly. Of the 31 NFL teams currently with a head coach, Cleveland Browns are yet to replace Freddie Kitchens. Only 4 have a minority head coach: the Pittsburgh Steelers, Miami Dolphins, Los Angeles Chargers, and Washington Redskins. The latter hired Ron Rivera less than a month after he was fired by the Carolina Panthers, making him the only minority coach hired in the current coaching carousel. Dallas Cowboys appointed former Green Bay Packers head coach Mike McCarthy, while the Panthers hired former Baylor coach Matt Rule, and the New York Giants replaced Pat Shurmur with New England Patriots special teams and wide receivers coach Joe Judge. Rivera, and I think we'll hold it there. Ryan, what do you think about the Rooney Rule? Let me get your perspective on that first. I think it's important to kind of understand how people maybe perceive it. What do you think about it?
Well, the Colts always had, at least from a meaningful period of time, an African-American coach. Think back to Tony Dungy, Jim Caldwell that took over. Obviously, the Super Bowl the Colts played in featured the first time 2 African-American coaches. And I thought at the time, that was setting a standard and expectation that, if there was any prejudice, that it needed to be removed just because of success. I think the problem that I have with the rule is it's teams just going through the motions. When you look at what just happened with the Cowboys, is Marvin Lewis really in a distinct competition from a success standpoint to Mike McCarthy? I don't believe so. So do they really bring him in to see if he is a viable coach, or did they bring him in because they have to appease a rule? That's what I don't like. The other side of this is, and kind of what's been left out from this conversation is, we're now in a time where there's a lot of female coaches, assistant coaches, trainers. When are they going to get, if you're going to basically go to a team and say, hey, listen, you have to interview a minority coach, when are they going to go to them then and say, hey, you have to interview a female as well? I know it seems a bit outlandish, but you can't, you have to be equal across the board. And obviously, you've got a well-diverse coaching staff now in the NFL. I just, like I said, I hate to see teams that just, when we can look at it as fans and know they're doing it just to do it, that defeats the purpose of it.
Yeah. I think that you make a lot of good points there. And for the most part, I agree with everything that you just said. To me, I think it's just a sham of a rule. And I kind of feel the same way about even, such policies as affirmative action. I feel like when you look at the landscape of the coaching world in sports, at the end of the day, it always balances itself out that whoever provides the best opportunity to win, whoever gets the best results in there and has the biggest and has the most, established credentials when you're comparing coaches from a winning standpoint, from a championship standpoint, those things should always take precedent over in my opinion, whether or not the person should be allowed to have it as a token gift for, the color of their skin. At the end of the day, I would rather that the NFL not interview a single black head coach than to parade Marvin Lewis around as if he is some kind of, look, here, we did what we're supposed to do. Nobody, like you said, nobody had any doubt in their mind that Jerry Jones had already made up his mind as to who he was going to make the new head coach in the NFL. And for the simple fact that they brought in Marvin Lewis just to satisfy a rule that the NFL put in place to try and bolster minority coaches into the league at the head coaching position, it's a mockery of the professionalism that a guy like Marvin Lewis represents. This is a guy who has a proven record as a winner in the NFL. He may not have been able to get his team over the hump in the playoffs. Yes, he's 0-7 as a head coach in the playoffs. But this is a guy who has been able to take a franchise like the Bengals and make it a consistent playoff contender. Look, I went to the playoffs one time in Jacksonville. One time. The Jacksonville Jaguars in the past 15 years have been to the playoffs twice. So I'm sure at the time we'd give our left leg to have a guy like Marvin Lewis come in and get us into the playoffs every year just to lose in the first round, because there's a big difference between getting in the playoffs and losing in the first round and not getting to the playoffs at all. And at the end of the day, when you look at what, and I don't blame Jerry Jones. I don't blame him at all. I don't say, oh, Jerry Jones, he just brought in Marvin Lewis to make him look like a fool. No, he was satisfying the rule that has been put in place by the NFL. It's the NFL. It's the league's fault that this rule has now turned into a joke. It's a mockery because when you look at these owners, when you look at the people who make these decisions, they do their due diligence. So if they already have somebody who they see as the lead candidate, let them hire the guy. Let them hire the guy and bring him in. Don't make Jerry Jones bring in a black coach or a minority coach, or, let's say even, to take it a step further, like you said, a female coach. Don't bring them in to parade them around as pacifying the rule, because that's just a mockery. And to do that to these people who have done so much for the sport in terms of representation on that minority end, I think it's a sad state, and I feel like the Rooney Rule needs to go. I feel like at the end of the day, the best coach for the job should get the job and shouldn't have to wait for the sideshow of a thing like the Rooney Rule to be satisfied before that happens.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, essentially what you've done is you've taken Marvin Lewis, who by all accounts has given his entire life to football. Okay, there's no shame in that. This has been his livelihood, and made him an obligation more than anything else. Now you're obligated to that. And like you said, from afar, we can look at this and criticize how it's perceived, but how does it appear to him to be perceived? Does he feel like, well, this is the only reason I'm being brought in, and I'm going to have an uphill battle if I'm going to beat out Mike McCarthy for this job? Because I think we've really yet to see a scenario where we've had a minority coach or a female coach, or however you want to present this, brought in, where we've said, okay, from a fan's perspective, we all felt Mike McCarthy was a better candidate to coach the Cowboys. Now, had Marvin Lewis gotten the job, we would have been surprised, but we could have went back and said, well, he might not have had that opportunity if the Rooney Rule didn't exist to bring him into that equation, where now he had that chance to sell himself to the team and explain what he has to offer. Without that moment, as you said, it really diminishes the value of the actual rule at the end of the day. And I think the Cowboys might be one of the best examples in all sport of this. It is the team owner's opinion of what he wants done with his team. You should not be able to go to him and tell him the process he must fulfill. If he wants to coach the team himself, which God knows he probably does, then he should have that opportunity. But it is ironic to me that a lot of people use the Cowboys kind of as, flying that flag of this is what would happen with a poor ownership. But, to be fair, I've always looked at Jerry Jones as, how a fan would run a team. I mean, he really is the biggest fan.
Cowboys' biggest fan.
He just owns them. He gets to make all those decisions, and for better or worse, I would say if any of us as a fan owned a team, I would probably be making the same irrational snap, spur of the moment, poor decisions because you're just always trying to do what you feel is right. Whether this works out with Mike McCarthy, we don't know, but it certainly does make you feel bad for Marvin Lewis, who is a well beyond qualified candidate who no doubt should maybe not be a head coach at this point, as you said, given the playoff record and how the NFL is so dependent on success, but certainly should have a position somewhere, maybe outside the NFL as a head coach and maybe the XFL or another league, or I think would certainly fit very well into a coordinator standpoint, really with most any NFL team.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And again, like I said, I don't put this on the Cowboys because at the end of the day, they pacified the rule. But I do feel like the rule shouldn't exist. I feel like in an ultra competitive sport like the NFL, it always boils down to who is the best coach for the job. If Marvin Lewis was going to be hired as the Cowboys' new head coach, we would have known that. That would have been something that would have been evident from the start. We all knew as soon as it was reported that Mike McCarthy was in Dallas, that Mike McCarthy was meeting with Jerry Jones, and that he was still in Dallas the day after his interview. We knew that that was the guy that he was going for. Now, did he bring in Marvin Lewis before he brought in Mike McCarthy, or he brought him in after he brought in Mike McCarthy? Do you know about that?
The news kind of all hit at once. The leak was
I
there.
felt like it all came at one time. Yeah. And now what I will say is that it seemed pretty pathetic that Dallas said the reason they didn't bring in Marvin Lewis was because he was stipulating that Hugh Jackson had to be part of the package deal to get him to sign. I think that was a bit of a gaffe for the Cowboys to even use that as an excuse. We knew you didn't want Marvin Lewis when we saw that Mike McCarthy was still in Dallas, that he slept over at Jimmy Jones's house. I mean Jerry Jones. I'm sorry, Jerry Jones's house. We knew who they wanted, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Mike McCarthy was his man, and Mike McCarthy was his man. Don't bring in Marvin Lewis just to pacify the rule. The rule shouldn't exist specifically because of this. That's an embarrassment to Marvin Lewis. He had to pick up from what he was doing, fly down to Dallas, sit in an office and talk to somebody who he knew didn't even want to hire him, had no intention of hiring him. Hell, they probably didn't even talk about him getting hired. They might have sat there and just had some coffee and chatted it up and shot the shit. Who knows? But at the end of the day, we all knew, and Jerry Jones obviously knew that wasn't the hire he was going to make. And I'm sure it felt just as cringeworthy to Jerry Jones that he had to bring this guy in, sit him down, knowing damn well he was not going that route. And that's where the failings of this rule come into play. And that's why it's a rule that needs to be abolished in the NFL. Let the competition play out and let the credentials of the coaches speak for themselves. I think that this league has progressed to a point, at least I hope this league has progressed to a point by now, that we realize that the value of minority players and coaches cannot be understated or cannot be overstated. There is the vast majority, I think 70% of the players in the NFL are Black or minorities. I think that there is a good portion of position coaches that are minorities. And as we've seen, Black coaches, minority head coaches, they can get their teams to the Super Bowl. We've seen that. We've seen that from Tony Dungy. We've seen that from Lovie Smith. We've seen that from Ron Rivera. We've seen that from a number of coaches. And we've seen a number of Black coaches also at the same time fail miserably. I mean, prime example is the Hugh Jackson situation in Cleveland. But that plays on both sides. We've watched Freddie Kitchens come in as the Cleveland Browns head coach and do no better than the coach before him. So it's not, I don't think that it boils down to at this point in the league, I don't think it boils down to the color of the skin of the coach. I think it boils down to, what results have you shown that you can produce in the past, and what, can you bring to the team in the future?